So let's get settled. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, we're going to be doing this chant on page 28, the Buddha's words on loving kindness. A lot of you know this already, but this particular chant is in the Buddhist tradition, especially in Theravada countries like Sri Lanka and Thailand and Burma. This particular chant is really considered a protection. And not just in Buddhism, but in most traditions that are supportive of the human heart, spiritual traditions, it's really emphasized the importance of being able to recall something beautiful, like a particular teaching, a particular chant, or whatever it might be, and to be able to recite it to oneself when our mind is all over the place and not stable at all. By being able to bring something to mind, we really protect ourselves. So you may not want to memorize the whole chant, although many people have done that. But you might find it very helpful to be able to bring some teaching, some chant, some poem to mind when your mind needs to connect to something instead of being pushed around by our fears or our strong emotions. This is, an ancient technique human beings have found. In the same way that a mother might sing to a child when the child is really having a hard time. And when we combine not just that musical quality that the mind can kind of come into sync with wise teachings at the same time, that combination of words that point to deeper truths and the kind of rhythm and musicality of a chant, that combination is very powerful for grounding and protecting the heart. So this is a particularly nice one, both because of the meaning of the words. The Buddha is really talking about the importance of stabilizing one's heart, and then with that stabilization, recognizing the protecting, healing property of kindness and that expansive quality of kindness. It's when we're really in touch with human kindness, we're in touch with the fact that it really isn't designed to be exclusive. Like, I care about you, I'm going to be kind to you, but I feel justified in hating and being unkind to you. That's not actually what we experience when we're connecting in a more simple and authentic way with kindness. It has this very nature to expand out and include everything that the mind is aware of. And you'll just see that. We can see that when we feel actually connected with kindness, you'll see that it naturally goes out to anything that's in our imagination or in our particular setting. And this particular chant is really about that protecting power and just trusting this alignment with kindness. So if you haven't found it yet, just listen along with us. We're doing the chant, the Buddhist words on loving kindness, page 28. Now let us make the Buddha's words on loving kindness. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm, and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. So with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Taking a little time and using our imagination, sensing the community we're part of this morning, all around, everybody in their own particular place, and yet somehow connecting. And really what we're connecting around are these deepening, beautiful intentions in our heart, these deepening values that we have about being present, being intimate. So we just sense that shared value, that it's wholesome now, not theoretically, but actually now. It's wholesome in a functional, practical way. It's wholesome to be connected. First and foremost with the reality of the body, the sitting body here. In a sense, the body, the breathing body, the sitting body is our gateway to reality, the reality of the present moment. And we have this very basic insight, the body is like this now. And in a more subtle way, we connect with the heart, the feeling, sensitive heart. There is this sensitive feeling heart here. It feels like this now. Even if it feels tight or held or numb or hot and reactive, doesn't matter, because the reality is this is the way the heart is now. And it's wise, it's healing, it's skillful to acknowledge the heart, just as it's wholesome and skillful to acknowledge the sitting body, the breathing body. And through the sensitivity of the heart, we have a felt sense of the wider world, the world we share with so many other beings, beings who are at times very wise and kind, and beings who at other times are quite ignorant and destructive, ourselves included, of course. And it's through the sensitivity of our heart and through the intimacy with our body, with seeing and hearing, with the way it is right now. This is how we express this trusting and kindness, this willingness to connect in a gentle and ongoing way with the experience of the heart and the experience of the body. And as many of us have learned over and over, it's not enough to open to the body and to acknowledge the sensitive heart in a moment. As healing as that is, it's not enough. We have to develop the capacity to stay connected, to have this continuity of intimacy, this continuity of being open, and in a sense exposed to our life. The unfolding experience of body, the unfolding experience of emotion, of thought, and then the wider world that we're sensitive to, that we're part of. And this willingness to practice in this way is really born out of all those moments when we recognize that being disconnected, being closed off, cultivating ideas of separateness, we've learned, haven't we, that that is not the way. It may be understandable in those moments when we turn away, when we close our heart off, when we throw somebody out of our heart. It may make sense in that moment as a kind of survival move, but it can't be the long-term strategy for living, to close ourselves off, to define others as being outside of our kind heart, not worthy of our understanding, not worthy of connecting. So in this simple way, we begin right in the quietness of our own home or wherever we're practicing this morning, the relative simplicity of our environment. We practice being in this inclusive way. First and foremost, learning how to include the body and this flow of sensation that we feel in the body, and the flow of visual experience through the eyes, and the flow of auditory experience through the ears, and also the flow of emotion and the flow of thought and memory. So in a way, we're learning, in a relatively safe way, we're learning how to enter the stream of our lives. This is what formal meditation practice is all about. We do our best to find enough safety to begin to experiment with submitting, surrendering, relaxing with the flow of the body, the bodily sensations, and seeing and hearing, and the flow of all the emotional and mental activity that's moving. With an openness, perhaps it's safe now to relax. Perhaps it's safe enough, not perfectly safe, but safe enough to put down the load, the heaviness of defense, and to trust this inherent capacity to be open, to be intimate, to feel, to allow things to come and go. So let's continue in silence for about 20 minutes. In particular, not getting confused by any strong thoughts or strong emotions that might arise. Really normalize that that's what happens sometimes. A compelling thought, a strong emotion or feeling. Oh, yeah, this is also just a movement being felt. Can I allow it to move, to be what it is, to give it space, as much space as it might need or want? So whatever one's particular experience is now, the underlying reality is that there's a movement of sensation and a movement of thought and emotion, movement of sound and sight, so movement related to the body, the five physical senses, and movement in terms of emotional and mental activity. And one of the habits of the mind is to resist or to try to control, or in one way or another to create friction, to get tight. So for the last couple minutes of our sitting time, maybe now with the eyes open if you like, not really looking at the screen, just a soft gaze down maybe toward the floor, reminding that it's okay for the body to be soft and relaxed. The practice doesn't really require any tightness. It may be there because of habit, of course, but we don't need to intentionally tighten up in the body or in the mind. And just noticing this movement of body and this movement of mind, and is it possible, do we have a capacity to allow these movements to move without friction, without resistance? And even when we notice different patterns of struggling or resisting, can that also be recognized as a movement that is nature and not self? It comes and goes, and we don't need to resist the resistance or struggle with the unskillful qualities that we might notice. We can see those so-called unskillful habits as just part of the movement here of the body and the mind. Just for another minute or two. We're not trying to come to any conclusion about the way the world is or the way my experience is. We're just willing to be aware, intimate even, and just experimenting. Is it skillful? Is it helpful just to allow this movement of sensation and sound and sight to be what it is? And the movement of emotion and thought, just allowing it to be what it is. It's really nice to be here with everyone. I so appreciate the simple healing beauty of folks coming together, even in this a little bit strange way over the live stream. But even so, just coming together, really what we're doing, as best we can, is we're reflecting together. And that means also including all of our spiritual ancestors. It's sort of willing to be authentic learners means we're willing to listen to the teachings of the Buddha, to our teachers, to each other, in order to better see what we're not seeing. And it really, this practice, mindfulness, mindful awareness, this practice is really about, it arises from a humility. Perhaps I'm not seeing everything there is to see. Perhaps there are many shadows, so my mind, my heart operating as if it knows when in fact it isn't completely, fully connected, seeing what is here. And then in that not seeing, my actions, my engagement will be off, will be a cause for harm for myself and for others. And therefore we just keep perpetuating these cycles of suffering, samsara. Suffering begetting suffering. And that's sort of what I want to talk about today. Last week, for those who weren't here, I spoke about karma and just really learning. It's a kind of training. However we are in any moment, we can train ourselves to sense that we're planting seeds. Like it or not, it's hard to be a human being in relationship with others, in relationship with the world, even in relationship with our own body and our own mind. It's probably impossible to be a human being without planting seeds, setting stuff in motion. So the obvious question for us human beings, this came out of last week's talk, the obvious question is, given how I'm living, how I'm thinking, how I'm relating to the moment, to each other, to myself, what kind of seeds am I planting? What am I setting in motion in terms of my own well-being and in terms of the healing and well-being of others? Am I living in a way that is a cause for suffering? Or is it possible, in moments at least, to live in ways that is a cause for healing and justice and freedom? I think that's a question we all have. I don't think this is sort of out of the box. I think our heart naturally cares about this. How to live in a way that's skillful. And at the end of the chant we did at the beginning, there's a really important clue. In the chant it goes, one should sustain this recollection, which is this radiance of loving kindness in all directions. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, so in this particular case, we're not turning the generous experience of kindness, that inclusive radiance of kindness, we're not turning it into a fixed view. This is how I should be, or this is how you should be, or this is how I am. It's really abiding in that generosity of the heart without holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, so the heart not dependent on what's coming and going in our world, is not born again into this world. Well, that's sort of a provocative last line, is not born again into this world. And yeah, I think it's really useful to leave it, let it be provocative. Not born again into a world, a moment where my mind, my heart is dependent, is fixed. Really, so that it's really looking or pointing to this possibility of the heart, mind not being entangled with conditions. So the world is sort of a word used in early Buddhism. It kind of represents the mind being entangled with sensuality, with sense experience. And it's really important that we have kind of an open, not defined possibility of the mind, whatever that is even, not entangled, not dependent on sense experience. Well, what's that? Well, one thing we can do is we can get very clear of the experience of the mind that is entangled in moments with sense experience, caught up in our views, our attachments, our likes and dislikes. That we can get to know pretty clearly, and over time, we can be really clear without any judgment. We're not judging ourselves. We know that the heart is entangled, is attached, or whatever, or we see it in others as well, and we're not projecting that in terms of good and bad. We're just seeing it in terms of karma, cause and effect. When the mind is attached, when the mind is identified, when the mind has a fixed view, then that seed sets in motion these reverberations of tightness, probably, right? That's not a judgment. That's just sensing, seeing, feeling the natural, lawful unfolding, cause and effect. Oh, attachment, identification, being tight sets this emotion. So this week I want to dig in more specifically around views and what the Buddha has to say about fixed views, being identified with our opinions, our points of view, our perspectives. And it isn't about not having perspective, not having a view. It's about what to do with beliefs or views or ideas or concepts, even identities, right? So all of these different expressions of concept, of ideas, of language, meaning, they have their place, clearly. It's hard to imagine like a mind, what we tend to do is revert to like a rejection of ideas because we notice that getting identified with ideas is problematic. Then we want to go to this, I don't know if it's correct to call it postmodern, but this sort of like rejecting meaning. So it's really about like when the mind creates meaning, has an idea, has an opinion, has a perspective, how to relate to that construction of meaning in a way that's planting a wholesome seed for our own well-being and the well-being of others. And how so often when we have an idea, which in some ways that idea might be a useful idea, but the way the mind is grasping, identifying, and all the tightness, the self-righteousness, the condemnation that can flow out of that identification, well, we can directly experience what that sets in motion, whether it's helpful or not. And one of the things we see so often, both in spiritual circles, but also in political, social circles, is this almost like it appears to be easier to pretend, to imagine that we're right than it is to acknowledge the truth of uncertainty. Something like, this is how I see it now. This perspective, this idea has some meaning for my heart right now. Gives this gives me in this moment some direction in terms of my engagement. But even though that's true, I understand that this perspective, this idea remains uncertain. And there's a really powerful sutta. Let me see if I can put my hand on it. Yeah, it's the Kanti Sutta. So it's number 95 in the Middle Link Discourses. And this is from Andy Lenski, a wonderful Buddhist scholar and teacher that I've been able to connect with over the years. Used to be the senior scholar at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies and executive director. But in this discourse, the Buddha outlines, how we gain confidence in what we're understanding. And he has something really provocative, that sometimes we gain knowledge or we gain some certainty based on faith, based on what people generally approve, because of listening to particular tradition that's been handed down through the generations, or working something out through reasoned argument, or accepting it after careful reflection. But the Buddha says in this discourse that that with all of those ways of coming to some perspective, some meaning, it may actually be true what kind of conclusion our mind has come to, or it may not actually be true. And we should remain open to that possibility. He doesn't mean our heart shouldn't be touched by what other people presume is true, or what we've received from a tradition, or through reasoned argument, or through reflecting on our own experience. Clearly, we're going to use all of those experience in one moment after another to sort of have some meaning that allows us to engage the moment. So we are going to create a view, meaning, moment by moment. And so what our practice is really recommending is that as we do that inevitable work of having a perspective, having some meaning, having a point of view, we understand what it is. Yeah, given my reasoning, given my reflection on my own experience, given what these wise and trustworthy people have said to me, this is how I'm perceiving the moment, how I'm sensing it might be, knowing that I don't actually know how it is. And you see, it really changes how the heart operates then in that moment, because I'm going to keep paying attention. I'm going to really cultivate a sensitivity, because I know that I don't know with certainty. I sort of am positioning myself as a learner from that place of humility. I'm not giving myself an excuse not to act. It's precisely by engaging that I'll clarify the question of, well, what is the skillful thing to be doing right now? So we don't get out of our predicament of being a human being by saying, I don't know with certainty what I should do, so I'm opting to not do. Well, how does that clarify? I mean, there's definitely a place for holding back, but even in holding back, we want to be in the mode of collecting data. Like, how does that feel, holding back? And what does that set in motion? Right? And this has, come up very poignantly in the last, well, forever, but maybe a little bit more obvious in the last few months, around issues related to racial injustice. Because one of the tendencies is, well, this is a complex issue. And there's any number of ways for maybe white people, myself as a white person, so many ways to justify, well, let me observe, let me see, but not kind of leaning in, always leaning out because it's complex, because I don't have certainty. Any number of sort of ways that injustice work, this is the way the status quo kind of remains static, is, things don't change precisely because these social systems, economic systems, political systems are complex, and we don't actually know. And it's very easy to see, like when we observe other people engaging the system one way or another, we, with our critical minds, can see what might be off. Oh yeah, that's just causing this reverberation, or that's just, and it's true, that kind of reflection. And so that can reinforce the tendency to hold back. Think about, not just in terms of social political issues, but intimate relationships, or raising children, or engaging our work scene. And if our strategy was always to hold back, what seeds are being planted? Or if our strategy is always to assume that the first idea, you know, is true and doesn't need to be questioned, and so we identify with it, act it out as if our first perspective, first way of creating meaning is absolutely true, and just go ahead forward full of steam with that idea, well, what does that set in motion? So avoiding those two opposites of holding back and this perception that I'd rather be certain because it allows me to engage than to acknowledge that I'm not actually certain and be afraid of non-engagement and whatever we imagine the stagnation of that non-engagement. And the middle way in this case is like avoiding those two extremes and letting this meaning and the engagement and the way we're going to show up, what we're going to say and do, letting it happen moment by moment. And so when we have some perspective, oh, it seems like this needs to be done right here. This needs to be said right here. But I don't have certainty, right? But let me say it, let me do it, knowing that I'm not certain. But knowing that I'm not certain doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means doing it in that more humble, from that more humble place. And it really changes how we language things. And it just might be that our words and actions have more impact precisely because the heart is remaining open, willing to learn, willing to listen, even as we move forward. Even in moments if we're moving forward with a lot of strength, a lot of loudness, we're shouting something, saying something to cut through, whatever's moving around us. But we don't have to pretend we're certain. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. It certainly isn't easy for me. I can't imagine it's easy for any of us. But we actually have a lot of evidence of what happens when we don't do this. When we don't do this, we get a world that's the way the world is now, where basically people are either operating as if their fixed ideas are true, and then that makes everybody else's ideas, different ideas, wrong, right? So this dualistic who's right, who's wrong, right? Or, so that's one portion of the people we're living with. And the other portion of the people have a sense of not being sure and tend to hold back. Even though they will have a lot of wisdom, but because they think they need to be sure, their wisdom doesn't get to be part of how things get resolved, because they're afraid of leaning in because they rightly sense that they're uncertain. And the other portion are people who, through habits and the way they were raised, are in the habit of presuming that what they think is right. And so they act in that way. And then it's that dance that makes the world the way it is right now, where most people are holding back, and a certain portion of people presume they're right and act on that. And then we have this very conflictual and unjust dance. And this is not just true politically, socially in our nation or in the wider world, but in our own hearts, in our own intimate relationships with our partners. Very slowly, I feel like I've been unpacking this in my relationship with my partner, Wynn. Many of you know, one of the teachers at Common Ground and the co-founder of Common Ground. And just these deep habits, the way the mind constructs meaning about the relationship, like you're wrong, or something like that, or that's not right. And how to, just what a liberating relief it is, not to presume I'm wrong, but to understand that I don't really know. I'm uncertain. And this is so central to, in my understanding, to the whole Dharma path or practice, to go from habits of certainty, because even that maybe the majority of us, the majority of the time, we're that person who's holding back, frozen up a little bit because of the complexity of whatever the situation we're talking about, wider world, more intimately in our families. That's also a fixed view. Like, I don't know what's happening, therefore I can't do anything. I see that a lot. I mean, in a way, I have both extremes in my personality. I have a lot of that type A ambition, willing to kind of do stuff, set stuff in motion. And I have a lot of wishy-washiness where I really get that I don't know. And I have some fear deeply embedded in my personality. And that kind of can be paralyzing, as many of you know. And so I tend to swing back and forth. People who know me see that in me. Um, and, it's really good for us to recognize those two poles in action with the wrong idea, the sort of constructed idea of certainty, fixed idea of being paralyzed. I don't know. I can't figure this out. I can't act until I have more clarity, right? Both of those as a kind of fixed view, where the mind, the thinking mind, is constructing some meaning, and the mind identifies with that meaning in a way that doesn't actually align with reality. Doesn't mean that that particular idea is somehow wrong. The wrong part of it, the unskillful part, is how the mind is using the idea. In a way, it wants certainty because of the sort of self-drama of certainty. It seemingly solidifies the sense of self, of ego, the certainty, like, oh, I can't act because I don't know, or these guys are wrong, I'm right, I'm gonna impose my will, and I have rights to throw these people out of my heart because they're identified with another view that I've decided is wrong because this idea is right. So this learning, right? And we want to start learning in relatively safe places, that as our mind does its natural thing of constructing meaning, we want to be aware. This is a relatively subtle, part of the mind constructing meaning all the time. And to how do I relate to that meaning? Oh, this is the meaning the mind is constructing right now. So as my mind is constructing some meaning, how does it change who I am in this moment? Like how I'm engaging, the kind of intentions I'm acting out in this moment. And is that way of engagement, as I feel it in the moment, does it have the flavor of being wholesome? What kind of seeds are being planted? What kind of karma is being set in motion, right? How is the future being shaped by how I'm showing up right now? And see, then the feedback is immediate, because as I'm sensing what I'm setting in motion, it changes how my mind is constructing meaning, which shapes how I'm going to respond and engage and show up. And this is the alternative between the two fixed views of uncertainty. I don't know, I can't act. I do know, and you're wrong, and I'm right, and I'm, power against power, basically. How do I rally the power that I have to overcome the power that you have? Now, this middle way isn't ignoring the truth of power. It's actually, when we check it out, you'll find, I think, as I'm finding slowly, gradually in my practice, it's the skillful way to use power is in this, like, from this place of humility, valuing sensitivity in the moment, trusting, like, the meaning the mind's creating. We're seeing that as a relative thing, like how my mind understands what's going on in this moment. Why would I presume that my first construction of meaning is the most useful one? So we're constructing meaning all the time. And like I was saying a moment ago, it's very nimble, like we might change course in a moment. We're not really tied to consistency because that would really come from a fixed view. But when the view is that views are always in motion, always changing, and wholesome view is a non-fixed view. It's a view that's evolving moment by moment, dependent on being open, being sensitive, instead of that habit of presuming we need a fixed stance, whether the fixed stance is I don't know or the fixed stance is I do know. It's really an open, like, I don't need a fixed stance. I can be in this more fluid space of, and this is what we call our practice, this practice of being open and being sensitive and being intimate and not so um, fixed on having a solution, but being much more interested in a way of being, a way of relating, a way of being in the moment that allows for plants the seeds that allow for a more wholesome engagement. And we just trust that what I say, what I do, the choices I make, the choices I don't make will better flow by emphasizing this humility and interest and intimacy and feeling into the moment. Okay, we'll see how this unfolds. And I know what I bring to this moment. I bring that kind of beautiful curiosity. And this is really where kindness comes in, because as we become a student of kindness, we really see how it doesn't have a fixed quality to it. It doesn't mean we might not, that we might initially think that kindness, because it certainly can, we can construct a fixed idea of being a kind person, or this is what kindness looks like. But when we really feel into that, we notice that's not kind. Kindness is this, it's a generosity, it's a movement really in the heart that requires that non-fixedness. It requires being open or being connected. And there's, whenever the mind is fixed on an idea, it doesn't really matter. It could be a relatively good idea, like kindness as an idea, or really despicable idea, like I'm worthy and you're not worthy. But whenever the mind's fixed on an idea, it has separated itself from the stream, the flow of life. We're diluted. The mind is not capable of acting skillfully when it's fixed because it's not really connected with reality. It's in this abstraction of an idea the mind constructed and this ongoing activity of defending the identification. It's not even so much defending the idea. I mean, it looks like that, but it's more about defending the grip itself, the need for being right. And again, remember that need for being right can also include when we're holding back, when we're feeling confused and uncertain, and we're basically telling ourselves, you can't engage your life. You can't, just to be provocative, take control of your existence and, make something out of yourself. Sort of giving ourselves reasons to be paralyzed as a fixed view, and identified with the view, but more identified with the idea I have to be certain. I like, there's this unconscious dependence on having certainty, even if it's very toxic and cause for so much suffering here in our heart and around us. But we like that certainty. So this is a really great place to begin to experiment in our lives about how we can get comfortable with the non-fixedness around ideas. And you might find you're going to have more ideas, more creative ideas, differing perspectives. And so ultimately how you engage your life, what you do, what you say, you're going to have more power. which is what we want. And there's nothing for us to be afraid of in wanting more power. We just don't want that power to be used in ways that are destructive. And power is used destructively when it's not nimble and connected with what's actually moving right here and now. When power comes from a fixed idea, boy, it can be really destructive. And we see this, in terms of bigger political movements, it tends to swing from one, suffering and hate and exploitation happening in one way, swinging and hate and exploitation, oppression happening in another way. It's not like, I'm sure, I hope there's been some change over the centuries in terms of the generalized wisdom in human culture. It seems like that might be true. We'll see as it unfolds further. But there's a lot of this doing the same thing, getting the same results, maybe covering it up differently, maybe masking it with some language. But a lot of the patterns of oppression, patterns of ignorance, patterns of economic exploitation just get replicated over and over again. And when we see that, it really should, I hope, inspire a kind of deeper reflection. Well, what am I not seeing here? That's the key, is not to presume we know why it's not working. Doesn't mean we stop engaging or trying to change things, but it just means that the emphasis is on learning, even as we engage, even as we speak truth to power in our intimate relationships, in the wider world, do what we feel motivated to do. And, there's a lot of appropriate appreciation for this capacity we have to be empathetic with other human beings and the suffering of other human beings. But that capacity we have to align and kind of sympathetically vibrate and sense how somebody is doing needs to be combined with wisdom. And the wisdom is not to get confused or lost in that empathy. There's more recent research around empathy that it can be used just as often for destructive causes as it can for helpful causes. Like where by this empathetic connection, I'm in a way that I may not be aware of, I might be choosing to be empathetic with certain folks in certain situations and unconsciously choosing not to empathize with other situations. And so that habit of empathizing in just particular ways with particular people can then further fixed views around race, around difference, around power, right? Like if I'm a billionaire and some other billionaire who I know is getting caught up in government regulation, it's really messing with their billions of dollars, I might really empathize about how wrong it is that there's so many cumbersome government regulations, just as an example, as opposed to empathizing with other people who might be benefiting because of those regulations. And so this is the piece of wisdom. Wisdom has a very deep suspicion of the mind limiting itself because of like certainty, fixedness. And wisdom has this strong inclination to remain open, to always presume there's stuff I'm not seeing or understanding. That's really like wisdom has this deep, resonant, never ending desire, wholesome desire to want to understand, to want to see what I'm not seeing, because that's really goes to the heart of learning. We have to want to see what we're not seeing. Otherwise, learning stops. And I just feel like that willingness to embrace that That's that kind of grounding as a learner, like in the moment, and really valuing and as a refuge. And next week, by the way, we'll do the refuges and precepts, which we do once a quarter. And it just takes 10 minutes. We'll recite them together as a group, and I'll give a talk on that topic. But this is what we mean by when we take refuge in Buddha and Dhamma. We mean being awake to the way it is, being a learner, being humble, being intimate. And that's what allows for Sangha, for this wise, compassionate activity or engagement, because it's really born from this humble stance of being a learner and really wanting to be Buddha, being intimate with Dhamma.